Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up my Shaketember reads for Shaketember 2025. So what I did wind up getting around to was my two plays, Tyrant by Stephen Greenblatt and Enter the Body by Joy McCullough. So I'm actually going to kind of talk about those in reverse order. I did not manage to read Burnham Wood this time around before the end of the month, but that is okay. That book will still be there when I have more time to read it. So let's start out with Enter the Body. This is a young adult novel in verse by Joy McCullough, and it is kind of a feminist re-examination of a lot of Shakespeare's heroines, focusing specifically on the point of views of Juliet, Cordelia, and Ophelia. And there are also sort of like the other female characters from Shakespeare plays are kind of minor characters. This reads almost like a closet drama in the sense that, yes, it's in verse, but it takes place entirely like underneath the trap door of the stage that the actors would like enter and exit from to either like represent hell or ghosts or something like that. So kind of using that as this device, Joy McCullough re-examines these three figures in Shakespeare's works. I think that this is written in pretty accessible verse, especially for younger readers, like readers who are teenagers, which is the target audience for this book. And I do think like just some passing familiarity with the plays is probably going to be enough, but even if you haven't read all three of those, you're probably at least aware of these figures in like our popular culture. So I would definitely recommend this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, which for me is very good. I liked it. I think it achieved its artistic goals. So let's switch over and talk a little bit about the plays. So I read King Lear, or that was a reread for me. I've read King Lear quite a few different times at this point. And then I also read a non-Shakespeare play, which was Edward II by Christopher Marlowe. That was my first time ever reading anything by Christopher Marlowe. And I actually really only knew about him via his, like, what little we know about his life and through his, like, association with Shakespeare. And kind of unintentionally, but it just was very serendipitous. Between those two plays and then reading Tyrant, Shakespeare on Politics by Stephen Greenblatt, I kind of like made myself a little mini reading list about tyranny, both as it regards to like the state itself and like the tyrants that are the titular characters of both of the plays, but also what I realized is the tyranny that happens within the family. So spoilers are going to abound for both sets of these plays. Obviously, King Lear is one of Shakespeare's most famous tyrants, I would say. I think his tyranny is also like really driven home in the way in which he can't handle anyone else's emotional honesty. He would rather be flattered even by his own family members, even if it means they wind up turning on him and treating him poorly, than be confronted with an honest disagreement or refusal to just sort of stoke his ego. What really kind of struck me this time reading King Lear, and I read it out of my Norton Critical Shakespeare, so I've read it since I took this course, but the last time I annotated and read from this particular copy of it was during my like Shakespeare and Sexuality upper level course as an undergrad. So it was kind of interesting going back and reading some of my old notes that I had here in the margins. One of the things that really struck me this time around, though, was that sort of parallel story between King Lear kind of being betrayed by two of his daughters and having his, like, one good and faithful daughter be the person that he then disowns. Parallels the story of Gloucester, who is betrayed by his illegitimate son, Edmund, and disowns and really is very gullible in believing that his legitimate older son, Edgar, is at the center of a murder plot against him. I was struck just by how gullible and easily manipulable both of these characters are, even though Lear is not as sympathetic because you can see his cruelty towards his family members straight away. Gloucester just kind of seems buffoonish and clueless, but with somewhat of the same disastrous results, both for him and for his family. And when I was reading Edward II, while there's kind of a contrast between the bleakness of the tragedy of Lear and what I guess I'm going to call like the darkness of the tragedy that is Edward II, you can kind of see a similar parallel in the sense that there's a very like dysfunctional family relationship at the heart of it. And what I was really struck by, I know Cordelia gets a lot of attention in Lear, but I was really struck by this parallel story of Edgar and Edmund this time around, just as I was by the story of Prince Edward, who eventually becomes Edward III after his father's death. Both Edgar, who is the sort of good elder son in Lear, and then Edward III, who is the good, virtuous, relatively speaking, son from Edward II, get the last lines of the play, and it is fascinating to me the ways in which they deliver these absolutely just heartbreaking conclusions to the play in just about 4 lines or so, indicating that because of the tyranny of their parents, the short-sightedness of their parents, honestly the selfishness and downright narcissism of them in some instances, they are then, the children, forced to grow up too fast and kind of pick up the pieces of what should have been adults behaving more responsibly. So let's read Edgar's lines first, and then we will go to Edward III. So this is at the end of the play after everybody who's died has died at the end of Lear. So he says, "The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long." Which is so interesting to me because he is kind of speaking, I guess, at a double meaning at that point, because he means the oldest in the sense of the older generation, and we that are young being like the younger generation is never going to basically get to live to that ripe old age because they will be too busy living with the fallout of the things that their parents' generation have done. But it's also interesting because he is the older of the 2 children. So saying the oldest hath borne most is kind of showing that, like, yes, as the oldest child, he did not get the benefit of his father's belief in him, nor did he really get any sort of brotherly love or camaraderie from his younger brother, who is a bastard child and conspires to get Edgar disinherited by framing him for the, attempted murder of his father, which Edgar has nothing to do with. He loves his father and didn't want to do that. So I see him kind of being caught between a rock and a hard place in that sense. And even though, like, we have this sort of model and paragon of virtue with the character of Cordelia, what I realized reading this time around is that she's actually hardly in the play at all. Like, her actions loom large over the course of the play, but she has very little stage time. Particularly after she's initially, like, disinherited at the beginning of the play. She's just absent from the stage while the other sisters have their, like, plots and machinations. So, and then by the end of the play, she's dead. And so it is interesting, though, that we have the sort of, like, one remaining good child, so to speak, deliver the conclusion and kind of the lines of this play, wrapping it up, kind of providing us some closure with maybe what Cordelia herself might have said. Who knows? We don't know. All right, so let's look at the final lines of the play from Edward II. So the only thing I knew about Edward II historically was that he was the king who was rather infamously dispatched by having his assassin heat up a red-hot poker and then shove it up his backside, basically, and kill him that way, which is not only like a terrible way to die, and in the play they say it's because they were hoping it wouldn't leave a mark on the body. I'm really kind of wondering what they must have been thinking when they thought that basically skewering someone with a red-hot poker was not going to leave a mark, but okay. But it is neither the sort of dignified, aristocratic, or, royal death of beheading, which was seen as a privilege, nor is it even the, commoner's death, which would be insulting to kill a king that way by hanging. It's this really specifically, degrading and insulting, violation of the body. And it kind of violates the rules of aristocratic civility that, Edward's courtiers have been trying to get him to follow, but he's continually flouting by promoting his favorite Gaveston above them. And then he's kind of repaid by their refusal to treat him with the same respect that they felt they were owed. So who's left behind at the end of this is Edward's teenage son, the prince, who becomes Edward III. So he has just ordered the execution of Mortimer, who is the conspirator who orders Edward's death. The First Lord comes in with Mortimer's head and says, "My lord, here is the head of Mortimer." Edward says, "Go fetch my father's hearse, where it shall lie, and bring my funeral robes." "Accursed head, could I have ruled thee then as I do now, thou hadst not hatched this monstrous treachery. Enter attendants with hearse." He says, "Here comes the hearse. Help me to mourn, my lords. Sweet father, here unto thy murdered ghost I offer up this wicked traitor's head. And let these tears distilling from mine eyes be witness of my grief and innocency." And that's the end. The play just ends. There's no real sense that justice has been served by the fact that anyone has been executed or there's been revenge. It's almost like he calls for the execution of Mortimer because that's kind of what he has to do as the king to try and put things back into equilibrium. But it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't fix anything. It's interesting to me that he speaks to the head of Mortimer saying that if he could have ruled him then in life, as he does now in death, because he can just move the head around and do whatever he wants with it, that Mortimer would never have conspired to kill Edward's father. And it's just fascinating to me. There's so much weeping that Edgar does. Or not Edgar, I'm sorry. Edward does in the play, Edward II. And most of his weeping is because he doesn't get his own way or because he's upset that he doesn't have Gaveston around him when he wants. Edward III, his son, cries here at the end out of grief, but also out of a sense of innocence lost. His tears are this marker of his innocence, which is such a contrast with his father's tears being almost the marker of emotion and passion that is out of control. So yeah, I was very moved by this portrayal of the children being really left behind to clean up the mess that their tyrannical fathers have made for them. So with that being said, obviously, Stephen Greenblatt's Tyrant doesn't really go into the discussion of Christopher Marlowe's play, but there is a chapter on Lear, and there are several other chapters on each of the other different tyrants. And, him being a new historicist, he does write a lot about, how this fit into the historical context of the way the theater worked at the time, the fact that there was no such thing as free speech during Shakespeare's time. There were literal government censors that could shut down your play, that threatened to shut down all of the playhouses in London, and how Shakespeare was kind of able to walk the line by setting a lot of his plays that were critical of authority or absolute monarchy or tyranny, to be honest, in mythological or historical settings, and how that kind of allowed him to explore what would normally be considered very provocative subjects without really getting in too much trouble politically. This is a very slim book. It came out in 2018, so kind of right in the middle of the first Trump presidency, but obviously before the pandemic and the election of the second one. And it's fascinating to me, these are the sort of timeless themes because tyranny and excess of need to dominate others is just a feature of human nature, right? But it's fascinating to me how much this book rings as true now as it did in 2018, and also how much the stories of tyrants and how they fall into these ways of trying to get so much power over people are just themes that we keep coming back to, because these are mistakes that we keep making as a species. So I would definitely recommend that book. It is very readable. You don't, I think, have to have read the Shakespeare plays that Greenblatt references, although it probably helps if you have some familiarity with at least a few of them. But he does a pretty good job of kind of providing you with the necessary textual support from the plays themselves. So overall, very successful Shaketember. I'm very glad that I read the plays and the books that I chose to read. I think that what I'm going to take away from this is that I really liked reading Christopher Marlowe, and I want to read more of his plays. Lucky for me, the Penguin edition that I have here actually does have all of his, I believe, 6 total plays that he wrote during his lifetime. Yeah, they're counting Tamburlaine the Great Part 1 and Part 2 as a single play, so 6 total plays. I will be reading more of these, and I will be looking forward to reading Stephen Greenblatt's Dark Renaissance, which just came out, I believe, and is about Christopher Marlowe. So, yeah, thank you all so very much for watching. If you participated in Shaketember, let me know how your reading experience went, and was there anything you particularly enjoyed or loathed as part of it? And if not, just let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.